everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome back to the Disney Movie Marathon. Today I'm joined by Nikki from Trivial Theater, and we are talking about, bizarrely, one of my favorite Disney comedies as a kid, the Unidentified Flying Oddball. I know I said I was not doing a regular miniseries like I had been doing, but ever since I started this podcast, I have really been looking forward to doing a series on Disney's Arthurian legends to pair with The Sword and the Stone. Yes, despite the weird title, this movie is about King Arthur. So even though I'm no longer doing every Disney take on the Legends of the Round Table, at least for now, I do plan to come back to the topic in the future, I still had to do the Unidentified Flying Oddball because I had just been looking forward to this one for so long. It truly was one of my favorites as a kid. That wasn't a joke. This movie is definitely not that great now as an adult, but for whatever reason, I watched and rewatched this thing as a kid, and I have been eagerly anticipating revisiting it all these years later for the podcast. However, this was not one of those cases where I was really looking forward to rewatching a thing I loved as a kid and then was horrified to discover it had aged like milk. I knew full well going in that this was not going to be great. I've seen a few recent reviews talking about how awful this film is, but that just made me all the more excited to rewatch it. And of course, going into a potentially hilariously terrible movie, I had to get Trivial Theater to join me. Movies like this are her bread and butter, so I knew we were going to have fun breaking down all the medieval mayhem inside this truly bizarre experience of a film. So had you seen the Unidentified Flying Oddball before?
No, I've seen a fair amount of like 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s Disney,
Mm-hmm.
but I have never ever seen this. I've seen, they're all kind of fun and whimsical. Like you've got like That Darn Cat, you've got, Absent-Minded Professor,
Uh-huh.
The Shaggy Dog, like all of those different ones. But yeah, this one was it was kind of next level. I'm not gonna lie. Like even in name, you think, okay, unidentified flying oddball. They're going to be going to the future. There's going to be a lot of involvement with, the UFO. No, they end up in what is apparently medieval England. I was confused, John. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, this is a bizarre movie. Like, it's even more bizarre than I thought I remembered. Like, I weirdly grew up with this movie. Like, I grew up with like a
Oh,
whole slew of weird movies. Because I'm
how
I'm
did you
sure.
how did you grow up? Like I'm super like because I grew up with a lot of Disney too, but how in the hell did you grow up with this movie? I'm really curious.
I know I've mentioned it before, but when I was a kid, we didn't have cable. My uncle had cable, and at night he would put in a VHS and hit record on the Disney Channel. So I would just get
Oh,
whatever played overnight on Vault Disney. So I would get all sorts
oh,
of weird old movies that like nobody else has ever heard of, and this was one of them. And I
so
loved
like the
this
overnight
movie.
stoner movies.
I mean, I suppose like that's how I'm fairly certain that's how I also watched The Last Unicorn because I think
Fair
that
point.
aired during that block. But that's how I saw a lot of old black and white Disney movies, a lot of the old 60s and 70s Disney movies,
Oh.
like all the more obscure stuff.
See, and maybe that's the thing because like of the Disney movies that I watched, it was always we didn't have the Disney Channel, but like the local library had just like a ton of
That too.
live
Yeah.
action from that era. But I don't
Yeah.
remember ever and again, the Disney between the 50s and the 70s was its own thing.
Yes.
Obviously, when you're talking live action and they are quirky by nature. That's just how they roll. But this is just I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm
Like,
still complicated feelings about this movie, and I don't know how to feel about that.
yeah. Like I loved this movie growing up, but watching it now, it is bizarre. And I feel like the only reason that I have any sort of affection for it now is because I grew up with it. If I had watched this as an adult, I would be like, what the heck is this? This is awful.
The thing is, there is some very cute bits to it. Like it
There
does,
is, yes.
like
Like there are parts that are just like scratch your head weird, but
yes.
like it somehow works, but I'm still not entirely sure if that's because of my nostalgia or what.
I think it's and I mean a lot of movies from that era. And I don't know. Would you say that this is aimed towards kids?
I
It would
don't
have to
know. There's some stuff in here that I did not. Okay, well, first of all, the Playboy magazine.
Yeah.
That was not in the version that I saw as a kid. Disney Channel
Oh my
cut that
goodness.
out.
Yeah.
I did not discover that until I was a teenager and bought the VHS of this.
Fair point. Actually, the in the trivia it mentioned something about this being one of the few films under the Disney banner where pornography, i.e., Playboy, is mentioned.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, no, that was not in there in the version I saw as a kid. Because I specifically remember there's a scene where the magazine is destroyed, and the guy who he gave it to is like all upset and because the wagon that he'd hid it in is now burst into flames. And I remember that scene from when I was a kid, and I was like, why is that guy so upset about the wagon? But they had cut all the references to the magazine out, so but they didn't cut that. So I remember thinking as a kid, why is he so upset about this burning wagon?
well, you have a really nice cart and it gets exploded. You're gonna feel a little bit of something about that. So, but yeah, the science behind this and just I know that again and I'm not gonna say it was the 70s so you give it a pass, but the fact that the main guy was just like, oh, things are going bananas, and the guy King Arthur goes bananas, and there's no understanding that he's not going to understand what that term is,
That
and
happened
that
throughout the whole
continues.
movie.
Oh, it does. And it's like, okay, I understand that modern guy, blah, 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 blah. But there is no understanding that, okay, even his clothes, like he wears these crazy, was it a plaid jacket or
Yeah,
pants? I don't
I
remember.
think wasn't it both? I'm not sure.
Maybe. But it's like, okay, wouldn't, you look at, other movies of that era and forward and, they dress in the time period, they come in their own stuff and then they change their clothes as they go. He stays in this plaid thing the entire
Hmm.
time.
Well, half the time. The other
Well,
half is
yeah,
in an
half the movie.
astronaut suit.
And then he's got like the really like the typical tight shorts and really tight t-shirt there at the end, but oh my goodness.
No, it's ridiculous.
It is, and I mean, that's part of its charm. It's like any movie from that era, Herbie or That Darn Cat. There is that. It is such a quirky piece of media. You
Hmm.
can't help but be, kind of charmed by it because it is so very strange. But there is also that very fine line of, okay, you can suspend disbelief, but how much, how far do you have to stretch to be able to suspend your disbelief?
Yes, exactly. That's why when I was watching it, I was like, would I even like this if I hadn't watched it as a kid? I don't think I would. Like, even though there were parts that did make me laugh, like genuinely, they were weirdly hilarious. Most of it was just like, who wrote this?
And what were they on? That's more my question.
Either that or who did they think that they were writing it for? Because it was all over the place.
Yeah, that is that. I mean, you know how they do Shrek? Like you've got those little hidden in jokes, but they're
Hmm.
really subtle. I feel like if you go back to that time, and I apologize, I'm saying this more than I mean to off the bat, but the 70s, if you're talking about kids television or kids movies, it was a different beast to what even you had like in the 90s and 2000s. So,
Hmm.
there is, okay, we've got the spaceship and we've got the robot and we've got this and that for the kids, but oh, well, we have to take care of the adults too. Here's a Playboy, here's a pretty girl, here's a couple of jokes that kind of aim for that.
And once in a while, there will be that kind of humor in other ones, because I can think of one or two from other movies of that era.
Oh
But
yeah.
I don't think they ever like fully showed a Playboy magazine.
No, no, definitely not.
That was like the most bizarre surprise. Like not a surprise now because like I knew
Yeah.
it was there, but like when I first watched it as a teenager because I bought a copy of the VHS from Pomida, which I don't know if
Nice.
Pomidas even exist anymore.
No, no, they became what was it? Hometown Shopko's, and then
Yeah.
Shopko's disappeared, and now there's like Dollar Fresh's, which is like an offshoot of Hy-Vee in most of the old Pomida locations or the old Shopko locations.
Well, now there's a church in the old in the old Shopko.
Do you think this was maybe more like you bought it as a teen? Maybe it was more like, tween teen fare, maybe?
I don't know. I bought it as a teenager because I remembered watching it as a kid and I was like, "Oh, that movie. I loved that as a kid. I want to own it."
Hmm.
And then I watched it, I was like, "I don't remember that."
Yeah, no, I understood. You know, it almost, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep going back to the point, but it's almost like under the broader head of family entertainment, maybe?
Yeah, I'm sure that's who they were aiming for. They were trying to get as wide an audience as they could.
Yeah,
I think most Disney movies of that era were.
very true. Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like coming into this and looking at the original title being The Spaceman and King Arthur. I know that unidentified flying oddball is more catchy, but Spaceman and King Arthur would have been so much more. That would have made you understand what you were getting
Hmm.
into.
Yeah. Well, this is based on a Mark Twain book. It's based on the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court.
Oh, I was kind of wondering, like it felt like a kid in King Arthur's court.
It's based on the same book that is based on.
Ah,
Weirdly,
okay.
Disney has made three different versions of this, and there's another one with Whoopi Goldberg.
Really?
So one of these days I'm gonna do all three. Like I'm starting with this one because like this was the childhood one. I just needed to do this one. But one of these days I want to go back and do all three. But also A Kid in King Arthur's Court had a sequel based on Aladdin. So I'm gonna have to do both of those together, and the Whoopi Goldberg
Right.
one could just be on its own. Which I've never seen the Whoopi Goldberg one. I've just read about it. I didn't even know that one existed until I started researching versions of King Arthur to eventually do for the podcast.
Oh, interesting. Well, and those like the Kid in King Arthur's Court that came out in the 90s, didn't it?
Yes. And so I think so did the Whoopi Goldberg one. So it's weird that they did it twice.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I suppose they kind of, oh, it worked here. Let's try it in a slightly different way here. It's
Yeah.
variations of the theme.
Yeah, well, it's two completely different approaches. In one, it's a little kid, and one, it's Whoopi Goldberg. So,
Fair point. And they're not exactly those things are not synonymous.
were you familiar with anyone in the cast?
Um, by sight, yes. By name, it's like like, oh my gosh, I know that person, but you can't figure out who they are offhandedly.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's a lot like Robert Beatty sounded familiar. The guy that played King Arthur sounded very familiar. By name or by looking at them in IMDb, I can't say they look familiar, but if someone were to say, "Oh my gosh, this is that person from this movie," and I would have been like, "Oh, hey, cool. That's great."
Well, for most of them, I was like, oh, I know them from somewhere. And for some of them, I think maybe it was probably just that I was remembering for them from this movie. But
Possibly.
I of course had to look them up, and I wrote down something for pretty much everybody because there was
Oh,
something that
nice.
surprised me in reading about them. So the main character, Dennis Dugan, played Tom Trimble and Hermes the robot, but he's apparently more known as a director,
Hmm.
particularly his work for Adam Sandler.
No. Serious?
Yes,
Really?
and he's still an actor though. He's pretty old, but has an upcoming role in Adam Sandler's latest film.
Oh, that's so strange. Oh my goodness.
Because he directed Happy Gilmore and he had a role in that, and he's reprising that role in the upcoming sequel to Happy Gilmore.
Really? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Because I mean, he was maybe in, well, and I mean, he's not ancient by any stretch, but I mean, he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s in this.
probably.
It's so hard to tell. Like, actors in the 70s just looked older. I mean, they all kind of did up at that point, but
Yeah,
still.
kinda. I think the most surprising thing for me with Dennis Dugan was that he directed another movie that I watched a lot growing up as a kid because it was taped off the TV on VHS. There was a 1994 remake of The Shaggy Dog starring Scott Wanger, the voice of Aladdin, which I
Oh,
probably watched that version more than the original version.
when did that, was it the 90s that came out?
94.
Oh, well, I thought that was Tim Allen.
No, that's 2006. That's a different one. The Shaggy
Um,
Dog, like we could do a whole series on Shaggy Dog because it has been made and remade and sequels and spin-offs galore. There's so many weird Shaggy Dog versions that we could totally do a whole series on it.
so it's kind of like Air Bud, there's like 15 of them.
there's not quite as many as Air Bud, and they're not like the Air Bud ones. They're all allegedly in the same continuity. The Shaggy Dog ones, they're not. Like there are remakes and then sequels to some of the remakes, but they're not all in the same continuity.
I was looking at the guy that played King Arthur, and I'm familiar with some of the movies, but like I couldn't pick him out in a lineup, so.
Well, that's Kenneth Moore, and I didn't recognize him, but he seemed familiar, so I looked him up along with everybody else. And he was in two movies that I recently did podcasts on for every version ever.
Really?
He was in the 1970 film Scrooge, and he was in The Slipper and the Rose, which is an adaptation of Cinderella. But he also played in a version of The Wind in the Willows that I looked for everywhere last year when I was doing Wind in the Willows series. But as far as I can tell, it's completely lost. It was a
Oh.
BBC production in like the 40s or 50s. And like we all know the fates of most anything broadcast by the BBC before the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, it ends up as like basically floss for people.
There is also some question as to whether it was actually truly recorded,
Ah.
because like a lot of times they would perform these as like a live play, and like different references online talk about it being re-aired, but it is possible that it was just the same actors coming back to play it again. So who really truly knows? All I know is that I couldn't find it.
No, fair. Absolutely fair. You gave it, you did what you could, and if you stumble upon it someday, that's great.
Yeah,
I would say the Sir Gawain or Gawain, right?
Wayne, yeah.
Like he looked really familiar too. Like so many of them, they looked familiar, but there are so many actors that have that similar look.
He is also somebody that I thought I knew, and I did know him, but it wasn't in what I thought I knew him from. He was Marley's ghost in the 1977 Christmas Carol,
Oh, okay.
and he was this is not something that I'm fully sure that I've seen. He was a main character in a Britcom called Dad's Army, which I know the name, and I know
Oh,
I watched
okay.
a lot of Britcoms growing up as a kid through PBS, but I'm not sure if that's one that I watched. So I don't know if that's why I recognized him.
Mhm.
But he was also in a movie that I saw last year that I told you we had to do sometime called The Moon Spinners,
Oh, yep,
uh,
yep. I
the
remember you
Haley
talking about that.
Mills movie,
Yeah.
which is hilariously terrible but very entertaining and watchable.
That is the best combination.
And he was also in the Terry Gilliam film Jabberwocky, which I watched
Oh,
years ago for Wonderland Wednesday back in my pre-podcast YouTube days.
nice.
That one eventually we should probably do for a podcast also.
Oh yeah, anything Terry Gilliam is going to be very interesting.
Yeah. I think probably the most famous person in this was Jim Dale as Sir Mordred,
Oh
which I
yeah.
didn't realize until I looked him up who it was. And he was also in another movie that I watched a bunch as a kid. He played Dr. Terminus in the original Pete's Dragon, for also from the Brown this time.
Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. I get you.
And I think one of the things that he's most famous for, at least in the US, is that he was the narrator for the Harry Potter audiobooks. But I
Oh,
don't know if I've ever listened to the audiobooks, but I remember people online talking about like he was the inferior version because Stephen Fry narrates the UK version and everybody thought
yeah.
his was better.
Well, he also did the narrator for Pushing Daisies, which
Yes.
I love that series so much. And one of the most, like, the narrator at the open had that perfect cadence.
Pushing Daisies, if I ever start doing like full TV series, Pushing Daisies is at the top of my list. Like I've got to do a podcast series on this because Pushing
Oh, man.
Daisies is one of my absolute all-time favorite shows.
It's so fun. I absolutely, it's so morbid, but yet so charming. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it doesn't feel like a show that I should love as much as I do.
No. Combination shouldn't work, but because it hits that balance so well.
Yeah. I have to mention Ron Moody as Merlin, who played Fagin in the musical Oliver.
Oh, nice.
And
Sheila White was in Oliver as well.
yes, I wrote that down. She played Bet,
Hmm.
which I didn't recognize her as anything but from this. Like I didn't remember that. Like I haven't seen Oliver since I was a little kid either. That one I watched maybe once or twice. It wasn't a repeat like this was.
No, fair.
But Ron Moody also went on to play Merlin again in A Kid in King Arthur's Court.
Oh wow, really?
So he played the same character in two different adaptations of the same book.
Also, this is one of the only places where you see Merlin as portrayed as a bad guy, really.
I was wondering about that. Like I need to read a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, so I don't know how he is portrayed in that book. But like from the most part, in different versions of the King Arthur mythos that I've seen, Merlin is good. So it was weird to see him as evil like he was in this.
Well, I mean, that's the only thing that this movie takes liberties with, really. The rest is directly associated with like the way that Mark Twain did his book.
Yes, Mark Twain definitely wrote about a NASA project in the 1970s.
Featuring, for some reason, a board meeting where a senator was like, "No, I'm not sending up men. Well, how about women? No."
Not with the elections coming up.
Oh,
And not to tangent, but I wanted to at least mention because I thought it was I had never known this when I was reading about Ron Moody. It said in 1969 he was offered but declined the lead role in Doctor Who.
really?
So he was on track to become the next Doctor. He would have been the third Doctor.
Oh my gosh, as compared to John Petrie.
Pertwee, I think.
Pertwee, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That
in
no,
an
that wouldn't
alternate
have been
universe, it
cool.
could have been Fagin.
No, no, that would have been awful, and I would have been very
When I
upset.
read that, I was like, he would have been a great master, but he would not have been a good
No,
doctor.
no, God, no. No. I can't accept that. That whole thing can go and live up in its own universe. It will not take place here.
But yeah, he turned it down. Although apparently years later, he would tell people that he regretted it. So
Well, I mean, I think that's true for if you're a British actor in that time. I mean, even now,
yeah.
Doctor Who is one of those. It's an institution of UK television. So,
Hmm. And then just a couple more tiny people. I mean, not tiny, but like roles that were like they're barely memorable, but I thought it was interesting. Rodney Bewes as Clarence. And I thought when I was watching this, there's no way I've seen him in anything. The only reason that he looks familiar is because I grew up watching this film. I didn't think I recognized him from anywhere else, but apparently I did because he was also in Jabberwocky,
oh,
and he was also the Knave of Hearts in the 1972 version of Alice in Wonderland. So two movies that I did probably back in 2017 for Wonderland Wednesday.
hmm that was
So
meant to
that
be.
it's long enough ago that of course I've forgotten it, but it was just kind of strange that two movies that I watched back then were other things that I'd seen him in. And he was also in a few episodes of Doctor Who. So like
I feel
everything
like
comes back to Doctor Who in these British
it.
productions.
Oh, it totally does. But I think that's the thing. It's not that. I mean, the UK is quite. It's got a rather large population. But yeah, you get those people, and they cross over between TV and movies a lot more effortlessly than they do here in the States.
Hmm. And then the last person that I thought I should mention, Robert Beatty as Senator Milburn. Like I could have sworn I recognized him from something. It was probably this movie, but he did have roles in Superman 3 and 4, which I did watch back in the day, so maybe I recognize him from then. The thing that surprised me most was that he also voiced the left door knocker in Labyrinth,
Oh, interesting. I was gonna say he was in 2001: A Space Odyssey as well.
which I haven't seen yet. I need to change that. I need to see that movie.
It's an interesting movie, but go in. It's one of those movies where it has such a. I mean, those like Citizen Kane. The
Hmm.
technical achievements for it make the hype so great. It's easy to lose track of the fact that it is still a movie
Yeah.
that, you have to be able to, experience for yourself.
Yeah.
Anyway, tangent.
Well, this is also like it's a tangent, but it's not a tangent, but it kind of is. I just thought I had to mention because I read that when this movie premiered, it had its premiere in London and was attended by Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, the younger sister and only sibling of Queen Elizabeth II.
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
like, I don't know why that is so bizarre to me. Like, why did she want to go to this movie of all movies? And
I
then I was
have
like, did
no
Queen
idea.
Elizabeth watch this movie? And then I was just laughing to myself, imagining Queen Elizabeth sitting down to watch the unidentified flying oddball.
Can you imagine them like sitting down like, casual Saturday afternoon, they've got their crowns on, and Margaret says to Liz, "Oh, Liz, I have to tell you about this premiere I went to. It was positively silly. Oh my goodness. I laughed and laughed and laughed. Ho 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 ho."
I think it's just one of those things. Like you think about people, like real historical people. Like I don't. Maybe she's still alive. I don't know. Probably
Mm-mm.
not. But
No.
you think about those people, and you don't think about them doing normal things like watching the unidentified flying oddball.
Well, and there is that fine line of, and I don't know how old she would have been in the 70s, but there is that fine line of, okay, you think about the class of somebody. That'd be like, Princess Diana sitting down and watching something like The Santa Claus, like the one that we reviewed.
Yeah,
It's like, it's just not something you would expect. But
yeah,
maybe secretly, whatever person was a huge fan of, random Disney movies like that.
yeah. I don't know. I read that. I was like, that is so weird. I have to
That
mention
is
it.
odd. That is very odd. But I suppose for the time, like it was shot at Pinewood Studios. It had quite a large British cast.
Yeah,
Like if it came out as the Spaceman and King Arthur, there's that kind of royal connection. So maybe there was something there. I mean, it was a Disney movie.
maybe she just wanted to learn about her ancestors.
Oh yeah, they're totally connected. I was gonna look up quick, like how this did at the box office, because I'm really curious. And again, obviously, then versus now, you're talking a completely different. Like you can't say, "Oh, it made, 5 million at the box office. How could it only make that much?" Oh, it
Well,
lost money.
yeah,
Well,
it was a bomb,
yeah,
which I'm not surprised.
no, no, same.
Yeah, I knew it didn't do well, but I didn't realize it had lost that much. It had a budget of 5.25 million and grossed 4.475 million.
Yeah. Do you
So
do you
almost
think
a
if
full
they'd
million.
do you think that the VHS had approved of by Princess Margaret on it?
Well, I have a copy of the VHS sitting right next to me, and it does not say that. So
Oh, missed opportunity.
it's one of the few VHSs that I still own. Like I upgraded a whole bunch of my movies to DVDs and got rid of the VHSs, but I never upgraded that one, so I still have the VHS. I kind of regret getting rid of them, even though I can't watch them. I kind of wish I still had them for my shelves.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked to a lot of people that they're very specific about the way that they view physical media. And if you upgrade something to, even Blu-ray with a lot of this stuff, it was
Hmm.
never meant to be seen in Blu-ray. The quality of it, the way it was shot or just the aging of time, it has that the thing that makes it cool is the fact that it does have that kind of, slightly blurry image. It's not sharp.
Yeah,
It's
this would look weird if it was in HD.
Well, it looks
Pristine.
probably it looks weird when it's in
That's
VHS.
true. That's true. Well, I suppose we can get into the actual plot of the movie.
Yeah.
We've talked for so long about all of the things surrounding the movie.
Well, one other real quick thing before we jump into that, just looking at the reception of this, LA Times says this film will provide mildly amusing summer fun for those having their first encounter with castles and kings. That is a really solid way of looking at it. Like, if you're a kid getting into that kind of stuff, this
Hmm.
is, I mean, it's obviously nowhere near accurate, but it does have enough of that kind of fun stuff that would make it, endearing. Like
I
like
mean,
for
I loved it as a kid.
yeah, yeah.
Like I actually really liked this movie.
Oh yeah. No, I could, I didn't, not that that's a crazy epiphany of a point, but it does kind of show, okay, this is what made it enjoyable for them. It's got explosions, it's got kind of that crazy like the whole sword fight. It's got,
Hmm.
the robot and all the crazy stuff he does. It has all those elements to make it, fun and endearing.
Yeah. I guess in that regard it succeeded because I mean I was a kid and I liked it. So
Yeah. I mean, it didn't take it too far over the top. Like, it didn't have a lot of the silly sound effects and things like that. It stayed kind of grounded, I guess, lack of a better term.
Mostly. Like
Within,
if you try and like analyze the science, then
no,
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 not at
you
all.
absolutely, well, no. I mean, you can't do that with, I mean, not that
Most of the
you,
Disney movies of that era, you cannot analyze the
no,
science
no.
because it's just basically scientific mumbo jumbo that means nothing as they're speaking it.
Oh, 100%. Like, they would have a Star Trek type display in the background and, they would just hit buttons or, add potions together or whatever. And
Hmm.
that was, nothing had purpose. Whereas now, so much stuff, they almost add too much purpose to everything that's there. But yeah.
Yeah, sometimes, definitely. They explain too much and make it too accurate when we don't care. Or at least I
Yeah.
don't.
No, exactly. And yeah, and in the grand scheme, like, I think too, there's such an access to all of that information. Like the idea, the idea of Stardust being able to be pulled into the shuttle to propel it through space really quickly, you know,
Is that what they were saying? I think my eyes glazed over when they were trying to explain the science at the beginning. I did not get that at all. I think
well, I think
I was
that's
just writing down stuff and I was like scientific mumbo jumbo.
maybe I think it was atoms. It wasn't Stardust, it was atoms that they were pulling in. But
I mean,
nevertheless,
either way.
yeah. Or the idea that, oh, we've, a week, we're 2 weeks, we can create an automaton. No, 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 no big deal. And like,
As they were talking about building a robot, I was like his reaction to being told that he wants a robot that walks, talks, sees, and reacts, the works, and he's like, "Yes, sir." Like nobody has ever built something like this before, and he's just, "Okay, I can do it."
right. And it's the idea of this incredible science. You've got this space shuttle that can, go to distant planets without a lot of issues. And, like cutting edge robot technology. But yeah, we're just gonna use it randomly. It's not that big of a deal. It's like getting, a really good sandwich. It's nice, but you're not gonna be overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll get there, but the part where he gets trapped on the spaceship and they're just like so blasé about the fact that
Oh,
he's
they are.
it's like
And it's that fine line of, okay, you don't want to take it too much over the top as an actor because it is a kids movie and you don't want to freak them out. But he didn't react to anything. It's like, oh,
it was a
I've got
mild annoyance.
yeah, exactly. Everything is mild annoyance. And when I was watching it at first, and I guess as we get into it a little bit further, we'll talk about it more. When he first lands and he's doing the thing, there was nothing about the robot, and it's like, okay, was the robot just like that little bit? Are they gonna bring him back? What's going on? Like, is he out
That is
cold the
true.
entire
Like
time?
I remember, like I of course had seen this, so I knew the robot. Like the main thing that I remembered with the robot was the jousting scene, so I knew the robot was coming back. But like they spent a long time without the robot, and I'd forgotten that the robot just kind of disappeared for half the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into it, but continue.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of scientific mumbo jumbo at the beginning. They're trying to do time travel via space travel. Okay, whatever.
And they're in like Senate hearing, like not full Senate hearings, but like committee meetings, really.
Yeah. Okay. Like this is one of those things where as a kid I'm just watching like, yep, this is what adults are like.
I mean, they kind of are, but
This is normal. And then I'm watching it now and I'm like, this makes no sense.
yeah, it does kind of, there's that suspension of disbelief watching it as an adult, and there's like it kind of stretches it beyond the point of like, okay, okay.
Yeah. I had many moments like that watching it as an adult versus when I watched it as a kid.
Oh yeah, and that's both. It's like reviewing kids media. You always have to look at it with through both those lenses. Like you don't want to let it off on all of those things because
Yeah.
bad kids media is still bad kids media. But you do have to give it a little bit of leeway more so than what you would with an adult piece of media.
I feel I'm probably going to be giving this a little more leeway than it deserves because I liked it as
Oh
a kid, but like watching
no,
it now, like it's just so dumb. Like you have the
Yeah.
whole building montage with the robot, and he's like trying to get it to go, and the screen lights up and says no go, and then he flips some switches, does a little thing, and it says all systems A-OK. I'm like, what?
I had some of those moments later when they were with King Arthur, but I'll get to those when we get to those. So
And then he's like basically teaching the robot about humanity in like a day via slideshow. Like, okay, yeah, sure, that's how this works.
it worked for Tarzan in the movie Tarzan. Why couldn't it work for a robot in a movie called the Unidentified Flying Oddball? The question you do have to ask yourself is, was I can't think of his name.
Hermes.
The robot the oddball, or was his human doppelganger the oddball?
Every single human in this movie and robot was an oddball. The only normal thing in this movie was the goose.
Yeah, no doubt. I did appreciate the fact that, and obviously there were reasons for it, but the fact that you had Dennis Durgan or Duggan doing both roles,
Yeah,
and he was sitting like they did some nice split screen stuff where they both appeared on screen. The only thing I wished is that they would have parted the hair different. So like one is one way, one is the other. It's like, you know.
yeah. I mean, I don't think this thing had that big a budget, so they didn't
No,
have
they
enough
didn't give it that.
budget
They
to.
there was very little thought given to that specifically. It's like, okay, we have a space suit, we have a plaid suit, and we have this weird, like, very tight shorts and t-shirt thing going. We're
The
good.
first scene where they're in the together, like being questioned, like they're sitting on that table in their basically their underwear. I was like, they probably filmed this in one day. Like he sat on this side of the table, filmed his part, then he scooted over and filmed the other part, then they stitched them together.
And they said, "Don't you dare move this camera on penalty of death."
Probably. And like I know it was to set up the running gag about Hermes and girls, but like as he's teaching him with the slideshow, he has the whole thing like this is a woman. I am a man. You are modeled after me. She is the opposite sex. I'm like, why do you need to teach this robot about this?
Well, especially if he's going to spend all of his time in outer space.
Exactly.
Is he going to run across? Is he going to start a dating app while he's in space?
I don't know. But then that's where the Playboy comes in because for whatever reason, the robot needs that because he was taught about girls. I don't know why they threw this in the movie.
You know what? I don't even have a cheeky answer for that. If anything, it should have been modern mechanics with, the centerfolds
That would
done
have been
that way.
hilarious, actually. That would have been hilarious. I'm just imagining him looking at a picture of a lawnmower, just staring at it.
Oh man. I think we need to write a sequel.
Okay, of what it's about.
I mean, poor Hermes got left kind of high and dry. We need to find him love in the
Oh,
modern
okay.
day.
Oh, I forgot how it ended. For some reason, in my memory, he got left behind. Like I don't know I mixed this movie up with. But for some reason, I thought Hermes got the girl in the end, but no.
I mean, honestly, I feel like he should have gotten the girl.
Yeah, kind of. They were kind of perfect for each other.
Oh, they are absolutely perfect. I mean, Tom could have gone off with the goose. They could have had space adventures. It could have been like Guardians of the Galaxy 1979.
Now I kind of want that.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we could have had Howard the Duck and Tom, going
Yeah.
around the galaxy. They're both wisecrackers or wiseacres. It would have been awesome. Disney, get on that.
I mean, they own both properties. They could.
Yeah, there you go. Now that would have been a good combination for a movie called Unidentified Flying Oddball.
Well, back to the spaceship.
Do we have to? I want to think more about Tom and Howard the Duck.
We'll get to a duck eventually, or a goose.
Hooray! Or goose, yeah.
So, for whatever reason, this robot is pretty much a perfect replica of a human, down to the fact that he's scared to go into outer space. They taught him too much via slideshow.
Yeah, slideshows will do that to you.
So then again, for whatever reason, they decide that Tom has to go up into the spaceship to try and talk the robot down. Like, Joe, just go up there and talk to him. Like, I don't think that's how this works, but whatever.
And he put on his best plaid jacket.
Yeah. And then lightning strikes the spaceship and it immediately blasts off into space.
Because that happens every other Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay. Of course. That's how this works. Makes perfect sense to me as a
Yeah.
little kid watching this movie.
Well, it's kind of like quicksand, like I thought quicksand was going to be a bigger threat to my life for as many times as it showed up.
Yeah, me too. I think most kids did.
Yeah,
It did show up a weirdly large amount of times in
it totally
kids'
did.
media of the time.
Yes. It's like, oh, we need to ride ourselves out of this corner. Ah, quicksand. Get the quicksand.
There is one little line in this whole sequence that did actually make me chuckle a bit because, like, through this whole thing, like we said, they're like positively blasé about the entire issue. It's like, oh, you'll be gone 30 years, but it'll only seem like 10. And then the scientist is like, when you get back, there will be a nice little surprise in your pay envelope. How does
Oh
that
yeah.
sound? Like a posthumous award. That made me laugh.
That was good. That was good.
And then more really dumb stuff. You have Earth like fading into the distance, and he's like, I gotta get this thing into orbit. And he presses a few buttons, and suddenly Earth is a lot closer, and now it's spinning faster and faster. I gotta slow this thing down. It's like, okay, sure, whatever.
And the countdown clock too made no sense.
It can join everything else that made no sense.
Fair point.
So down on Earth, you meet Sandy, a fair maiden who's holding a goose for a reason which will become obvious later.
Just really likes geese.
The spacecraft lands in front of her. She thinks it's a creature, and the hatch opens, and she's like, why would it stick its tongue out at us? I remember thinking that she was hilarious as a kid. Like,
Oh yeah, no, she definitely has moments.
but I've always liked like the dumb blonde trope. Like for whatever reason, people who are just obviously dumb are kind of hilarious to me. So I liked her as a kid. She got on my nerves a bit as an adult, but she was mostly fine.
I mean, you could tell from moment one because she was like literally the only female that she was going to be the love interest.
Of course. But
Yeah.
also she was like one of the only really like she's so stupid, but she's one of the only really sincere people in this movie. She's like so sincere about everything. And I did like that about her.
Oh, 100%.
So then Tom comes out dressed as an astronaut and she thinks it's a monster, which I mean, she has no context for whatever this thing is, so that's not a weird thing to assume. So she throws the goose at him.
And I'm just going to add the idea of this being set in 500 AD. It's like it looks closer to 1500, which I know is not the point, but it's like no one has that good of hair in 500 AD.
This is not something that ever crossed my mind as a kid, and it only
Of course not.
briefly crossed my mind as I was watching it because this, like nothing in this movie makes sense. So I didn't bother trying to place it. But now that you mention that, like, yeah, this is not nothing in this movie is 500 AD. This is everything looks so much later than that.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And also, like, when is King Arthur supposed to have taken place?
I thought it was hang on, let's see.
Like, I think I always get him confused with other later kings. Like, I always think of, like, Robin Hood, but that's not King Arthur.
No, not remotely.
That's much later.
Yeah, so King Arthur, according to this, and this explains the 500 AD thing, was the 5th or 6th century AD. So that's why it fell in that neck of the woods.
Hmm. Yeah, it's probably just kind of easy to mix up a lot of that mythology. And
Yeah.
for most people, they probably don't care. So I, it doesn't really matter, especially in a movie like this. But it is something to think about that they
No, I
didn't
would
even
agree.
bother thinking about. And then you have the first instance of Tom talking to pretty much anybody, but just rattling off a whole list of things that I didn't ever bother writing down because none of it made any sense. it, he just he acts like everybody should just know what he's talking about, which like maybe if he was back in the lab, sure, but like he's in 500 AD talking to a peasant girl who thinks he's a monster, and he just doesn't ever seem to get it that nobody is going to understand what he's talking about. It's like she's dumb in one way, but he's really dumb in a completely different way.
Oh, 100%.
And this is one of the instances where like I love her reactions to things because like he's rattling off this list of things and she's just staring at him and says, "What is it you want?" And he says, "Well, I'm trying to find some way to get back into orbit, rewind the clock, and get back to the Cape." And she just looks at him, "Hmm. Well, we must be going now."
Yeah, there's so much like he can see where he's at, and there's no he's as clueless as everybody else.
Yeah. Like I said, she's dumb in one way, he's dumb in a completely different kind of way.
Oh yeah, like the amount of oblivious is just off the chain.
Yes, exactly. So he asks where she's going, and she says Camelot, and she calls him a monster, and he asks why she keeps calling him a monster, and she says, "Well, you have no face and no ears." And he says, "Well, if you help me get this thing off, I can show you what I look like inside," because he's wearing his astronaut getup and he's got a big helmet on. And she says, "Well, I'm not that curious to look inside you."
Is it bad my when they mentioned Camelot, my brain went to the Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
I kept thinking of Monty Python through this. I was like, this is like bargain bin Monty Python.
Oh, it is. I wanted to start singing. We're the Knights of the Round Table. Da 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 da. Anyway, yeah.
And then he asks her, "Who's in charge here?" And she says, "I suppose I am. Mom died of the plague 3 years ago, and this is father." And she holds up the goose.
As you do.
And then I'm not entirely sure I understand his reasoning, but he decides he needs to go to Camelot because he says something about finding a reasonable person who doesn't think he is from outer space. I'm like, okay, whatever, sure. And then they get captured by Sir Mordred, and I guess I thought it was his squire, but then everybody's calling him the page, and he works for other people too, but Clarence, and they're taken back to Camelot. And again, more reasons why this guy is so dumb in a completely different way. They pass by a lady who screams and runs away, and he asks why people keep doing that. As like, I thought you were a genius scientist. I think you can figure this one out.
Are we sure though?
And then this is where she explains the goose situation. She says that one day she went out, and when she came back, her father was gone, the door was locked, and there was a goose in his chair eating crumbs off the table. So naturally, what else could this have been?
I mean, yeah, it's clear. I mean, who else could it possibly be?
So she's going to Camelot because she wants to find Merlin and see if he can change him back to a human. And then when we get to Camelot, we see Merlin performing tricks for the king. And I didn't catch it as a kid, but he's speaking pig Latin as magic words.
Nice. Now that's a sign of a true auteur right there.
It's pretty obvious that this version of Merlin doesn't actually have any powers. He's just some sort of a cheap magician who's fooled the entire kingdom into thinking he's magic.
Yes. But you know what? That's you respect the player, respect the hustle.
So Sir Mordred brings him in, obviously still dressed as an astronaut, and everybody is terrified. And he tells them that he has it subdued. There were 5 more just like it, and he dispatched them all, sparing just this one. And then they're all trying to figure out what to do with this thing. Apparently, it's too large to be a beast of burden or a pet, so they decide to burn it.
You know, that is the logical explanation for 500 AD, I would say.
I suppose. I guess. At least as far as I've learned in media about 500 AD.
Absolutely. You know what? Burn the witch. Regardless of what it is, burn it.
And then again, more of him being clueless. He tries to explain that in saddle shoes, slacks, and a blazer, he'd look like a human. It's like they're not going
And
to
they're
know what
like,
any of
"What are
that stuff
slacks?"
is. But it doesn't really matter because they are literally not paying attention to anything he is saying. It's like he doesn't exist. They
Yeah,
they
it gets
finally
weird quick.
yeah, they finally register something when he says he needs a wrench to get the helmet off, but they misunderstand and think he said a wench. So they send a lady named Peg to tend to his needs within reason.
Absolutely.
And then he basically tells her to get him in a headlock and twist. And she's like, "Don't worry, you won't feel a thing." And I'm like, "What?" Okay. And then she's like, and runs away when the head comes off. And then again, he's so dumb in a completely different way because he basically goes on to tell them about the history of the world.
Yes.
Like like they cut away and then cut back to later. Everybody's asleep, and I'm like, get to the point. Sir Mordred should have dispatched this one along with the other five he supposedly killed.
Yeah, it's just that the whole because there is that thing about, okay, this guy's going to show all the amazing stuff that, happens through history and like prove his worth, but there's just it loses the funny very quickly.
It does. This was probably like the most annoying part.
Yeah.
And then everybody's like totally bored, falling asleep, and the king orders him to be taken away. And then they're dragging him out, and he starts yelling about Sir Mordred is eventually going to try and take over the kingdom. And I'm like, why didn't you lead with that?
Because that would have, oh, I suppose that's like everything else has to hit a certain runtime. So they added
I
the,
suppose.
let long is funny in theory.
So he gets locked in a dungeon, and Sandy shows up to deliver him food and a hammer so he can free himself from his change and return to his natural habitat. Oh, you mean the USA? Hmm. Or the sky? Wherever you like it best. Like I said, I love how earnest she is.
Oh yeah, definitely so.
And again, he's trying to get her to understand that he's a human. She doesn't get it. Like, even though at this point he doesn't have the helmet on, she sees his face. Somehow she still doesn't get that he's a human. And at some point in this whole interaction, he realizes that his suit is heat resistant, full of asbestos, and could potentially withstand being burned. But I was wondering about the knobs. Like, are the knobs, like, he has knobs all over the suit. Are they metal? Because those would melt.
Oh, they absolutely would. And yeah, the idea of this, can you imagine like someone saying, "Oh yeah, I'm covered in asbestos. I'll be good." How would you? I don't know. That yeah.
I think this is probably before the point where they realized that asbestos was bad.
Oh yeah, that's not even a question.
But he tries to explain that he'd be fine, and he tries to display his heat resistant powers or the suit's heat resistance
Yeah.
by holding his arm over a flame that she's holding. And I have to give her credit for her acting. She looks genuinely disturbed. Like I almost feel like she's the best actress in this whole thing.
I would agree. Like she's the most consistent.
Yes. And she says, "I must go now." I love her reactions to things.
Well, they're certainly the most genuine if you were to, if someone was to show up and display that kind of behavior, I think that is the truest reaction of anybody. Be like, I gotta go see a man about a horse.
And then the next line, he says, "No, there's no reason to be afraid. I'll be saved. This material is a mixture of silicate of calcium and magnesium. It doesn't conduct heat. Now do you understand?" And she just looks at him, shakes her head sadly, and says, "Of course," and then leaves. Like, for everything that is dumb about this movie, just she makes it better.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and she's kind of, not that she's us, but she's kind of us.
In a way, kind of, yes. So then he hears somebody moaning in the next room, and he looks through a window and sees an old man on a rack getting stretched out. and it turns out this guy is Sandy's father.
Oh, there's a great line later about the fact, well, he might be a little taller.
Yes. So this guy tells her he wants to get word to his daughter that he's still alive. And he tells him that he'll tell King Arthur after he's burned at the stake. And the guy says, would it not show more forethought to tell him before being burned at the stake?
And the thing is, like, what if it turned out that it didn't work? Now, obviously, it's a kids' movie and they're not going to do that, but like, there's that fine line between confidence and arrogance.
Well, also, like, I was wondering too, like, I'm not an expert on what they make spacesuits out of, but like, would a spacesuit withstand a full bonfire? Like, I know it's supposed to be heat resistant, but like, nobody survived the Challenger. Like, it
No,
burned up.
definitely
So
not. Well, and
at some point, fire is not going to be, it's not going to withstand fire. So how hot does it have to be?
and the thing is, you're still encased in something besides your spacesuit. If you like were wearing a spacesuit and came through the atmosphere, you're not surviving that. Like that's not how that works.
Yeah. But still, I mean, like, if a spacesuit like that was truly that fire resistant, why don't they make fireman's uniforms out of that? Like, I feel like they've pushed the bounds of reality with this spacesuit being that resistant
Well,
to
that's
fire.
the only thing that they push the space or the bounds with. Clearly, I mean, the question could also be asked: why don't they make the whole plane out of the black box material?
Yeah,
It's kind of in that realm, you know.
yeah. I mean, these are things that, like, at some point I do just go with it, but then there's things like this that I have to stop and I'm not going with it anymore until I'm like, stop thinking about it.
No, I don't blame you. Well, there's with Mystery Science Theater, part of the opening song is repeat to yourself, it's just a show. You should really just.
Yes. I'm,
But
I'm,
but there is still that very, like you say, there's that line at which you're so taken out of that immersion
yeah,
that there's just nothing else to say.
yeah. And I feel like this movie, like, as much as I can get into it, it's just kind of back and forth between going with it and being taken out of it.
Oh, agreed. And I think that it's so ridiculous that it was never meant to be like all encompassing, you know?
Yeah, that's true. But like, I also feel like I've recently watched like the original Monty Python and the Holy Grail for the first time. But like, I never felt that way when watching that movie because it like fully embraces the ridiculousness. It doesn't ever try to be anything but ridiculous. But I feel like this one almost tries to be both and fails.
Fair point. But also look at the people writing it, and nothing against the folks that wrote this. But Monty Python's writers, by this point, they had done 4 years of flying circus. They had been a part of a comedy troupe in university before this, or before flying circus. They had the chops to really to know those balances and to really
Yeah.
flesh out the things that needed to be fleshed out. This was probably written over a weekend by a bunch of guys that were either stoned, drunk, or both. What was expected? I mean, they're probably, on a tight budget. Like, you look at a lot of movies today. Look at anything that's done by, and again, this is not meant as an insult, but like something from like the guys that used to do Sci-Fi Channel movies or things like that.
Hmm.
There's thought put into the basic premise of it, but anything beyond that is above their pay grade to some extent.
That is probably true. They probably just gave this maybe one rewrite at most and then just went with it.
Right. And again, no disrespect, but I do think that it plays in.
Yeah. But again, with everything that is dumb about this, you still have stuff that actually does make me laugh because when it comes to being burned at the stake, you have the whole scene with them like debating as to what the history was and like trying to remember what they were being told, mixing everything up, which was I was kind of rolling my eyes and like this is so dumb. But then Tom comes out in the astronaut suit and he's like inflated because he turned on the air conditioning stuff. And they're like, look at the size of him. He's eaten a hearty last meal. And then we get the first, well, not the first, but like this is where the Playboy comes back because for whatever reason, like why did he bring this with him? He tells Clarence to take this thing out of his the pocket in his leg and to hold it until he gets back. And he says, there's some very good articles in there. And Clarence looks at it like he's scandalized, but he shoves it into his tunic.
I mean, I suppose that it's one of those jokes that's, aimed towards like maybe the dads. that
I'm
are
sure it
watching
is,
it.
but like it's one of those things that fully takes me out of the movie because I'm thinking like, why did he bring it with him? Like I know it's for they're setting up this running gag with Clarence in the magazine for later, but like if you were an astronaut stranded in hostile territory hundreds of years in the past, why would one of the only things you bring with you is a dirty magazine your robot brought with him to keep him company in space?
Well, I mean, it does get lonely, and it's a male robot, so there's no chance for anything there. You know,
I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like it fully takes me out of the movie because I'm like, why? Why?
it's a good question, but I guarantee you're never going to get a satisfactory answer.
No, I'm sure not.
Although we can speculate all day long, and that's probably a question for another day.
And after this, we get another line that actually makes me chuckle because he yells up to King Arthur, King Arthur, could I please have a word with you after the burning? He just looks at him. He's like, well, if he feels up to it, I see no harm. And then when they're tying him to the stake, somebody accidentally flips the switch on his suit and he deflates. And they're like, oh no, it would appear he's wasting away. We'd best proceed while there's still something left of the monster to burn. And of course he survives, and everybody's freaking out, even Merlin, and he's like saying it's impossible for him to have these unholy powers. And one of the knights says, I'd rather he was with us than against us. And Arthur says, I think we've already abused that option. And he tells Mordred to take care of it and sends Clarence off to get his sword so they can dispatch this thing. And Sandy intercepts Clarence to try and get him to stall Mordred because they don't want him to be killed. But then Tom appears out of the fountain. Apparently I don't know if some of the fire got into his suit or what, but something was burning, so he jumped into the fountain. And after this, you have this scene where he comes up with this plan to magnetize Mordred's sword to give him a chance to beat it using Excalibur, the sword in the stone, which he
Yes.
pulls out of the stone
Yes.
because apparently he has a pure enough heart to pull it out of the stone.
I don't
And
believe
I
that
was
for
like,
1 second.
yeah, exactly. I was like, I would question that because he is apparently so attached to this magazine to drag it around with him everywhere. But he did tell Clarence that there was some really good articles in there, so maybe he wasn't lying. Maybe that's the reason he likes the magazine. He does
You
have a
know
pure
what?
heart.
That's kind of the classic argument. So that it possibly could have been true back in the day. He's looking at it going, why are there so many pictures? I want more articles. There was a great recipe for chicken wings, marinated chicken wings. Where is more of this content? It's a choice. We'll leave it at it's a choice. I
Everything
did
in
have
this
to
movie was a choice.
yeah, you're not wrong. I did have to ask though, the way that they magnetize that sword, what in the wide world of sports were they talking about? How? That
I
isn't
don't
any
know. Like, I know that you can magnetize certain metals by hitting them in the right way, but I don't think it's this easy. I think this is another thing where they just fudge the science. Like,
yeah,
maybe I'm wrong, but I was like, there's no way it is that easy to make a sword fully magnetic.
yeah.
So he has magnetized this sword, which Clarence brings to Mordred, and then he has to get Arthur to help get it out of the sheath. And then when they find him, his sword sticks to his armor and then starts picking up everything around him. And this is one of those scenes where I fully remembered this as a kid. I thought it was hilarious that Clarence was following him around, sticking like plates and things to the sword as he swung it around him.
Oh, it's a great it's probably for my money, probably one of the top two gags of this movie that
Probably,
works.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Again, I don't think that's a controversial take, but yeah, it is absolutely it's cute. It's got that great slapsticky bit. Like we talked about, there are moments in this that work really well. Like the slapstick is on point,
Hmm.
but I think that Disney in that era was good at slapstick.
Oh,
If you
yeah,
go Dean and Jerry and all that kind of stuff, they had those abilities.
yeah. And then all of that culminates with him falling off the tower into the moat when the sword gets too heavy.
I'll be honest, at first I thought that they killed him, and it's like, damn, this got dark quick. Plus, how did he die that quickly?
Nope, he just got too heavy. He's fine.
Yeah.
And then everybody is apparently just fine with the monster because the next scene is him and Arthur walking around the table talking about all the knights.
Yeah, there was a lot of And obviously there is that thing about plot convenience and you only have an hour and a half and you don't want to have to over explain stuff, but some
Hmm.
of it was just like, oh, well, you know what? We tried to kill you like 15 times, but you're still here. We'll call it good. You may be a demon, but you're a nice demon.
Yeah, it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
So Tom tells Arthur about Sandy's dad. Apparently, Sir Mordred has trapped him in order to get a false confession of a crime so that he can take his land. He has this whole plot to take over the kingdom, and he tries to take Arthur down to see Sandy's dad, but they're intercepted by Mordred, who denies everything and demands a duel to the death for his honor. So he pays Clarence with the Playboy to get him out of the kingdom so they can figure out a plan. And for this scene, I was like, I wonder what they did with this when I was a kid because, like I am like 99.999% sure that the Playboy didn't exist in the version I saw from the Disney Channel. So they just cut this whole scene. I wish I could watch the version I watched as a kid because I would like to know how well they cut that together. Because obviously I wouldn't have known a sloppy cut as a kid. I'm just
Right.
curious.
Right.
The editor in me is curious how they made this
Oh,
work.
100%. I mean, I'm sure that like you recorded it, when you were a kid, there's probably a cutout there someplace. It's just a
I
matter of
probably still have it, except all of my VHS tapes that I know still exist, they have mold in them, and I don't want to find a player. Like I don't know what to do with that. I don't want to get rid of them. I want to see if they're fixable, but there's almost certainly mold in all of the tapes because they
right.
were like we had a flood in our basement and all the tapes and everything in the basement got moved out to an outbuilding and they grew mold.
Ah,
So but however they cut it, it may not have even made a difference because you never actually see him leave the castle. And the next scene is just him arriving on horseback for the joust, or him in quotation marks because it's not actually him.
right. I mean, it's kind of him, but yeah.
So Sandy goes out to greet him to give him something to carry into battle, one of her quote unquote father's feathers.
Aw.
And when she gives it to him, he blinks and beeps and says thank you. And we see that the actual Tom is up in the castle with Clarence, and Clarence thinks that the robot is his twin brother. Which, I mean, it's not an unfair assumption to make when you're in 500 AD.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a thing about Occam's razor, the most,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Sandy tells the robot that since he's going to be killed anyway, she's just going to reveal her strange feelings for him. And Tom is listening in on the radio and he sees them kissing through the helmet. And he's like, that's enough, Hermes. That's enough. You can put her down now.
Which I suppose at that time and place, how would you, especially to kids, how do you explain, well, this is a robot, but this woman has feelings for the robot, you know?
I don't think they cared enough.
Probably not. But they also didn't have them be together at the end, and they were a much better match than anything that Tom offered.
Yeah, that's true. So the joust commences and he immediately loses an arm and then he loses a head. But he's still alive-ish, I guess. So they keep going until he finally gets stabbed and falls off the horse. And when all of this is happening, Tom is like going back and forth from the window to a chest, rummaging around for something until he finally finds a bunch of papers that he gathers up to go and show the king. So everybody's gathering around this dead body, and Arthur looks down on him and says, "Pity, I was getting rather attached to it, whatever it was." And Merlin's looking at it and he wants to keep the remains to study in his laboratory. And Sandy tries to interrupt to ask about her father, but he's like dismissing her.
Well, of course, because I wouldn't want to turn someone's dad back from a goose to a human. You know how much of a grudge he would hold?
So while they're all gathered around this body, Tom runs up with the proof that Mordred has been seizing land and is plotting a takeover. And everybody is, of course, shocked to see him alive and also dead down there at the same time.
Yeah,
But
fair
he
point.
looks over the papers and sees that it's legit and demands that Mordred be captured. But Mordred yells death to Arthur and rides away.
That's just rude, you know?
And then later, Tom is trying to fix Hermes while everybody else is just watching. And Arthur makes some remark about there's something unholy about this. It would be better to let him rest in peace. And while he's working on this, Sandy asks if he could help fix her father when he's done with Hermes. And he tries to tell her that he saw her father in the dungeon. And this is where you get that line when she says, "Are you sure? He's about 12 stone and 5'9". And he says, "Well, he may be a little taller now."
I think that's one of my favorite lines of the whole thing.
So he gets Hermes working again. And it becomes pretty clear that there's like something between them, like Sandy and Hermes. And like Tom is looking at them and then he switches him off. Basically tells her that he's resting.
Oh, absolutely.
And then he's trying to get back in her good graces or whatever. It's like trying to take her on a date ish and asks if she wants to tour the Stardust. He tells her he has some LPs that she probably hasn't heard. I'm like, you
Yeah, oh,
think?
100%. Well, she's caught most of the popular ones, but he's got those really eclectic ones.
When she mentions Fleetwood Mac and the Rolling Stones, I'm like, she's not going to have any idea what any of this means.
Yeah, the amount of like just completely oblivious is just that's one thing that pulled me out because there is, and I
Yeah.
know what they were going for a specific kind of gag.
Yeah.
100% get that. But it did get to a point where it's like, okay, yeah.
She basically turns him down and he asks why she had a change of heart because she confessed her love before the joust. And she says, "I bared my heart to your brother here. And it turns out he's full of wiggly things and smoke."
I
That was
mean,
another of my
any
favorite
person,
lines.
any person worth their salt is going to be full of at least a couple wiggly things. I mean, and if there was, you think back on that time, there was probably a lot of tapeworms, so she probably had wiggly things too.
Just her delivery of that line. He's full
Oh, it
of
was
wiggly
good.
things and
It was
smoke.
good.
So he's trying to explain that at least he is a human. He's as human as she is. And then he lists off a bunch of things about his life using words that she's going to have no idea what he's talking about. And he says, "I'm just an average American boy. Don't you understand that?" "No." And she leaves.
He's big on like not that he's braggy because I don't think he really like he is a little bit, but like the things he brings up, he's it is that level. Oh, I'm gonna show you this and that and the other thing, and it's like yeah, you just said word salad to this poor woman.
Basically, yes. It's not the same, but like every time something like this happens, when I first went to college, I took a class where there was one of the teachers, he might have been like in charge of like a whole section of the school, but he was like, it's been so long ago, I don't remember exactly what he did, but he was basically a genius. And another teacher, we were asking about him, like we weren't getting what he was talking about, and she was like, he doesn't remember what it's like not to know.
Right. Oh,
So
that's
I
a really
kind
good
of
way of putting it.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like Tom is that, but in a more dumb way.
Oh, 100%. And that's actually a really good way to state it. I mean, like it's like not that she's not intelligent in her own way, but there's no way that she's going to understand at the level that you understand.
Yeah,
And it's a small point in the grand scheme. Like it's not a point of contention for this movie
yeah.
because they just didn't care and
Mm,
they weren't going into it with that in mind. But it does still affect the dynamics.
yeah. So then after this is the scene with Clarence and the magazine. He stuffs it inside the hay cart, and then you get Arthur and his men. They're talking about some stuff that he has, and he's got some sort of futuristic NASA weapon that I'm pretty sure they invented for this movie because why would NASA have a ray gun? This is basically a ray gun.
Well, they managed to build a spaceship that could propel itself and be powered through space by atoms.
Yeah,
They built a fully functioning automaton that looks and sounds and can, interact with all of the humans. The fact that they've got a ray gun, to me, I'm not surprised. I'm just gonna leave
yeah.
it at that.
Again, this is something that at this point I shouldn't even question it. But I was like, why does NASA have a ray gun? Whatever. It doesn't
I
matter.
mean, it was to break up stones when, Hermes ended up on random planets.
Okay, sure. Yep.
What's the question?
Perfect. So he uses the ray gun on the hay cart. It bursts into flames, and Clarence is sad that his magazine is gone now. So then Arthur wants to try it, and for some unknown reason, he wants to try it on the walls of Camelot. I'm like, what? Why?
Because reasons.
It's so dumb. It did the reaction did make me laugh because of course the walls explode, and Sir Gawain, his immediate reaction is to say, "I for one have always had the highest regard for you, Tom, and I remain your humble servant."
Kind of makes me think of Gone with the Wind. I've always relied on the kindness of strangers.
For every really stupid thing that happened, somebody would have a line that actually made me laugh and made me forget how stupid it was.
Well, that's good. That's incredible. Again, but it goes to show that this movie still has captured your imagination in some ways.
Yeah, it does. Like, even though this is a very dumb movie, I cannot say I didn't enjoy it.
Well, exactly.
So then Arthur tells them that this thing is a very dangerous weapon and they have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The most obvious foreshadowing that it was ever foreshadowed.
And they did a great job of protecting it too,
Yes, that's so dumb. You have Merlin has been watching them this whole time. Obviously, he's in league with Mordred. And
Oh yeah.
he tells his henchmen that they need to do something about the magic candle, which is what they call the ray gun. And his henchman is apparently named Oaf. Just Oaf.
You know what? That's like the best name in history.
And Oaf says that he'll kill him, and Merlin says no. He tells him to go get the demented girl and bring him to his chambers. So he goes to get Sandy, and apparently Merlin has a secretary. And whatever she is, like there's a lady sitting at a desk outside his chambers. It's like, okay, what a secretary, whatever. That made me laugh for whatever reason. I was like, sure, Merlin has a secretary. Whatever.
He's a magician. He's got a lot going on. I mean, why wouldn't he have a secretary?
Merlin also has a pet owl, which is a very cute pet owl. I love owls.
Aw.
When I recorded the episode on the Sword and the Stone, we were talking about owls for a while, and I was wondering, like, is this supposed to be a nod to the Sword and the Stone with Archimedes? Because, like, why else is this owl here? It plays no role in the rest of the story. It's just there for this scene.
I mean, it would have come out around that time, right?
This is probably 15 years later.
Okay.
So it's long enough that the people making this movie would have been pretty familiar with Sword and the Stone.
Yeah. And I mean, they probably could have even been kids at that point. Some of the writers,
Yeah, that's true.
upper main audience for Sword in the Stone. So yeah, yeah, makes sense.
So Sandy goes in to see Merlin, and Oaf throws a bag over her head and throws the goose out the window. He was going to eat it raw, but Merlin yells at him to not do that because he'd get feathers everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of those reoccurring issues.
And then Merlin goes to search Tom's room and finds the gun under his pillow. And he exclaims that he's fiendishly clever. Who else would think to hide it there?
You know what? If they didn't have pillows back in the day, which I kind of feel like they may not have, I mean,
I think it was like a folded up blanket. So I just assumed that he folded up a blanket to use as a pillow. I don't know if they had pillows or not, but I assumed that he'd folded up a blanket to use as a pillow because of where it was positioned on the bed.
that would make sense.
Either way, if it wasn't a pillow, he hid it under a blanket, which is still hilariously dumb.
At least hide it under the mattress. Just don't sleep on that mattress because the chance of you accidentally setting it off and, blowing off part of your spleen is not outside the question.
Yeah, setting the entire room on fire.
I mean, it was a castle. How far could the fire have spread?
I mean, they shot the wall and it exploded, so
Yeah, that was kind of disconcerting. It's like, you have subjects that are right below that wall.
yeah. It was one of those where I was like, what?
Way
Whatever.
to be a responsible king. Yeah, exactly.
So then back in the main part of the castle, Tom is trying to build a working model of a spaceship for some reason. I literally have no idea why.
Because he wanted to explain to them the ins and outs, like the in-depth ins and outs that go into, the science behind a spaceship.
Sure, that makes as much sense as anything else in this movie.
Absolutely. Also, how did he get power? Like when they're inside trying, and this is a bit back, but when they're trying to rebuild Hermes, how did he get power to be able to run all that equipment?
I have no idea. I didn't even think about that, but you are correct.
I know. Repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I should really just relax.
So he's flying this little airplane thing around, and somebody shows up with the goose. And now he wonders where Sandy is. And somebody says that they heard someone screaming from the woods. And Clarence says he saw her going off with Oaf to see Merlin. I'm like, why didn't somebody tell somebody about any of this?
They had other more important things to do.
So then Tom tells Arthur that they're in trouble, and everybody runs out, and he runs to his bedroom and finds the gun missing, and tells Arthur that Merlin is in cahoots with Mordred, and everybody thinks cahoots is a place.
I mean, it could be.
Yeah,
You've got Hell, Michigan. You've got Dickeyville, Wisconsin. There's Jackson Hole, Wyoming. There are weirder places.
that one lake that's like 3 miles long, the word, not the lake. So Tom goes back to the Stardust and gets a moon rover. Like, how did they fit that thing in there? That-
Well, back in the 60s, everything was more compact. Also, every time they talk about the Stardust, all I could think was the Vegas casino. I don't know why. I guess I watched the original Ocean's 11 and maybe I pulled it from that. I don't know, but
So he takes this moon rover and Arthur's shiniest suit of armor and goes to find Sandy. And out in the woods, Merlin and Mordred are plotting how to get to Camelot, and he shows up in this thing. And Sandy runs out to tell him that he shouldn't have come. And Merlin asks if he has any last words before Mordred zaps him with the magic candle. And he tells Sandy that he really grooves on her, and his idea of heaven is to share a slice of pizza and a six pack while watching the Super Bowl on television. Maybe smooch a little at the half. And of course, she's just looking at him blankly because what on earth does any of that mean to somebody from 500 AD? Again, he's so dumb.
it wouldn't even make sense in like the 18th century, much less, yeah. Oh well.
So she has no idea what he's saying and asks about her father. And he gets frustrated and tells her that he just said he loves her. And she says, I'm not going through all that again.
You know what? She's a woman that knows her limits. That's great.
But then she says, on the other hand, if it's between you and Oaf, I'll take you. Apparently that's enough for him because he looks happy. She climbs on and they drive away.
Well, you know what? When you have to make decisions, even if the decisions aren't that great, I suppose choices are choices.
So they're trying to leave. Mordred shoots him with the laser, but because his armor is so shiny, it bounces off and knocking over trees and demolishing their tents. And they think he's bewitched the gun. And they end up shooting him with arrows and flattening the tires and taking them captive.
Well, there you go. That works. Sometimes the old tech is the best tech.
Yeah. So everybody leaves except Oaf. They have him stay there to guard them while they sneak into the castle. And of course, they easily outsmart Oaf.
What was your first clue that they were going to do that? I mean, what in his, demeanor or his name would bring you to that conclusion?
I don't know why they thought Oaf was a good choice to leave with them. Like, I know they're both really dumb in their own ways, but either of them could outsmart Oaf.
Well, it was probably the idea of like you've got the muscle, like you've got the bouncer muscle guy. That was probably why.
Yeah. Anyways, they escape and they are able to launch off the rover because apparently it's equipped with a rocket-powered flying chair for some reason.
I mean, Don't all cars have that? I just assumed that every single car had that.
That was me as a kid. I was watching this and I was like, yeah, this seems that's how NASA works. Obviously NASA has this.
Oh yeah,
Like I did
without
not
that.
give this a second thought as a kid. And as an adult, I'm like, what? What?
I mean, again, it was one of those things where we should have had jetpacks by the time we were 18.
So they fly off, and he ends up leaving Sandy with Clarence and goes off to fight Mordred on his flying chair. And he whacks him with a mop as they're all climbing up the stairs outside the castle, and they all go tumbling off over the wall like dominoes. And this was where I was like, this just feels like bargain bin Monty Python.
Oh, 100%. There was a lot of that in this. Even the use of the castle, because they used it a few different ways. So,
Yeah. This like there have been other points in this where in retrospect it felt like Monty Python, like bargain bin Monty Python. It didn't, no,
yeah.
none of it felt like Monty Python, but this particular thing with him whacking one with a mop and then everybody's tumbling over like dominoes, I was like, this almost feels like something that would happen in Monty Python.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you on that.
Eventually he gets taken out by an arrow in his chair, not in his body, and then there's a whole full-on battle happening, and he calls Hermes, who is back at the ship, and tells him to activate the rocket and thrusters on the ship so he'll start blasting all the soldiers over, and then to set the magnetic fields on pulse, which starts pulling in the soldiers and knocking them out when they hit the magnet.
Well, thank God it only affected their
That's
armor.
what I said. It's like this is like literally no one but the bad guys were
Yep.
sucked in by the magnets.
It has a really strong detector on it.
There was one line in here that did make me chuckle because as it's sucking in like all the metal except for whatever the good guys are wearing, it also sucks in the armor that Tom is wearing. And he says that the king told him it was solid gold, but obviously it's not.
No. But it sounds good.
So everybody is pretty easily defeated by the magnet ship. And Arthur gives Tom a place at the round table, and he's preparing to leave and tells them that no one back at the Cape would believe him. And then he remembers he's got a camera, and he takes a picture of everyone. Like, if you had a camera this whole time, I would have been taking pictures left and right if I had a camera and I was somehow
Oh,
back in time.
agreed. And then he leaves the camera with King Arthur. It's like, okay, this isn't gonna, cause ripples through history at all. No butterfly effect at all. What? Come on.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he tells Sandy that he wishes he could bring her with him. And he rattles off a whole list of things he wishes he could show her, none of which would make sense to her. But then he tells her he can't
It
bring
didn't
her
make
because
sense to me. It's like, I don't want to see your 10 speed. Why would I give a crap about your 10 speed?
and then he tells her that he can't bring her because she might age 1,000 years on the way back.
And what's
Okay,
this
why would she age 1,000 years and nobody else would?
right, exactly. What is your scientific premise for this, Mr. Professor?
I don't know. She thanks him for getting Merlin to change her father back into a human and asks him to deliver a note to Hermes. So he leaves, they blast off, they're flying through space. Hermes opens the note from Sandy. It's basically a rejection letter, and she says she likes Tom better than him. What? Why?
Because you want to not, you know what? Poor Hermes, he lost his head, he lost his arm, he got, jousted through the middle of his chest. He's, thrown aside for a good half of the movie. He's brought back just to hit controls and then gets his heart broken again. Yeah. Poor guy.
She saw his inner wiggly things in smoke and didn't like that. So then they hear honking, and her quote unquote father had stowed away, but apparently father was a girl and has laid an egg. I don't know why that was important, but it was, apparently. And he realizes that if the goose could come with and not age, that means Sandy could have come with them because she'd be fine. Like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, yeah, but like you should have known that beforehand.
You'd sure think so. And why would you not like the goose was just literally standing there the entire time? Like how big are your goggles to not be able to see things peripherally for you not to see this goose?
Yeah.
Also, and this is random, but I didn't go back and check and I should have, but I didn't think to. the feathers on the back of the duck were kind of like shades of gray. Was that I thought the duck or the goose in the earlier in the movie was all white, like head to toe white.
I don't know. I didn't pay attention, but I would not be surprised if they had multiple geese and they just
Yeah.
switched them out as needed.
They needed a female goose for that
Yeah,
end bit.
I don't know. But yeah, he tells Hermes to turn around. They're going back for Sandy, and that's the end.
They had a hard enough time getting into orbit the first time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like they had to build these wooden launcher things and set off explosions to launch the ship, which shouldn't have worked, but whatever. Everything else about this didn't make sense, so why should that?
Right. And they know the idea of fuel to get you back into space another time. No biggie. We got all that we need.
They got her from the same place they got the electricity to fix Hermes.
Oh, there you go. Nice.
Oh, that's the unidentified flying oddball.
Yes.
I loved it as a kid.
So obviously the feelings are a little complex now, but is it something you think you'd go back and rewatch now as an adult?
Not anytime soon, but like if somebody wanted to watch a weird old movie, this would be one that I would recommend.
I would agree.
Like I wouldn't not watch this again. It's not
Right.
going to be high on my rewatch list now, but like for everything that was really stupid about it, I actually laughed. Like there was a lot of things that were genuinely funny and a lot of things that were unintentionally funny, and together that balanced out and made up for how dumb it was.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, for my first watch, there is that endearing thing, about a quirky 60s, 70s Disney live action piece.
hmm
Just they're inherently weird. They don't make a lot of sense, but they are built to be cute and not wholesome. I don't think is the right word, but they're built
Not
to be
this one.
fun. No, God no. But even there is there's enough slapstick. Like when I think slapsticky stuff, I don't necessarily think wholesome. But yeah, I mean they're inoffensive. They're fun. It's a good if you need something to just take your mind off stuff and just kind of enjoy the ride. It's a good thing to try.
Yeah. In the end, I would say I like this movie partially because of nostalgia and partially because it's a good dumb movie to watch.
Yeah,
I it's one like I wouldn't recommend it to most people probably,
right.
but like if you know that you like good bad movies or if you like weird 60s, 70s Disney movies because that's like a genre all of its own, which I
Oh,
really
100%.
like there are good ones and bad ones, but as a general rule, if there's a live action Disney comedy in the 60s and 70s, I like it.
They're fun.
So this is not one of the higher end ones, but it's worth watching if you're in one of those specific camps.
Right.
Anyway, I think we've said all that there is to say and more about the unidentified flying oddball.
Signed, sealed, and put back in time.
We'll be back at some point with something better than this movie.
Oh, tons better. Not even a question.
Until the next one, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they'd like more from you?
You can find me on YouTube at Trivial Theater. I do a wide array of random, obscure, and straight up bad movies. Something like this would be right up my channel's alley as far as the things I would review.
It really would, actually.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like we've dissected it enough where I don't feel like I'd want to do this specifically.
Probably not. You don't need to
No.
revisit it that soon.
No, I definitely don't. But things like this, just kind of that quirky, weird, semi-cringy movie are right in my wheelhouse. But yeah, you can find me here on YouTube, Trivial Theater. So stop by and say hi.
Okay, well, we will see you again soon for something else.
Sounds good. I'm always up for something else.
Thanks for listening to the Disney Movie Marathon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My link tree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.